There are no public appearances today. I will move to pass the minutes dated October 1st, 2018. Give me a second. By James. Ahmad?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, 0, 4, 0. Passed. So, in...
You can now set a minutes here to the for November 5th, if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about those. And the November meetings, minutes are also here. I move we pass those meetings. Give me a second.
Second.
James, or TJ, Imad?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, 0, 4, 0. Those pass as well. Thank you. Okay, in January 7th, we're going to talk about summer school. So with Lisa and Bree and Caroline, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there you are. I'm sorry. So come on up, and why don't you go ahead and, however you want to get started, go right ahead.
Perfect. Well, Happy New Year. We're discussing summer school in January, so that's the good news. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to reintroduce Bree McPhee is our coordinator of summer school. Caroline Racine-Gillis is our executive director of integrated supports and accelerated learning, so thank you for your preparation and work on this. Bree's going to share with you the results of our last summer school session and some really great data that we have based on last summer, and then she's going to talk a little bit about some really promising changes moving into the next year. So I'm going to turn it right over to Bree.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Sorry, I'm fighting a cold, so if at any point you can't hear me well, please let me know. But thank you for this opportunity to present this evening to you. And like Lisa mentioned, Happy New Year. It's always fun to present to summer school when it's cold and raining, and dreams of the warmth that are forthcoming can be just on the horizon. It'll be June before we know it. So like Lisa mentioned, I'm going to give you a program overview of 2018 summer school, including key highlights that we want to talk about, but really focus for our 2019 implementation. Secondary is on the docket, so we want to talk to you about that, as well as some other program recommendations. We will end with the budget update and hold questions till the end. So that kind of gives you an overall of the presentation for this evening. So first, we're proud to report that we increased enrollment again this last year. If you'll recall, in 2016, when I presented to you, a specific request was that we improve and increase our enrollment numbers. So we've seen a 19% growth since 2016. So we had 5,923 students enroll this past year. So we're really excited about that. The breakdown is there in terms of students in K-8 versus in our high school. The program believes that the 4,300 to 4,500 range is optimal for the program. If any additional enrollment were to occur, we'd really be looking at secondary and grades 9 through 12, primarily in work experience and first-time credit. So I just want to kind of set the stage. That's what we would think about next year and going forward for enrollment. 4,300 to 4,500. So you'll see. Yeah, for 4K8. Yeah. Yeah, so we're pretty much.
That's what I was trying to catch there.
Yep, sorry. If my voice is cracking a little bit, sorry about that.
I heard the optimum number is well below what we're doing now.
8th grade.
Okay.
Yep, 4,300 to about 4,500 would be optimal for the program. We also call it our student demographics. You'll see that for the most part, we've maintained the same percentages of students of color, low-income students. We're really proud to report that we serve 22% of students with disabilities as compared to 14% for the district average, and 44% of our students are English learners as opposed to 28% for the district average. We're also excited to report that we increased the number of internal teachers. So you can see from the slide, we went from 318 in 2017 to 438 last year. So really excited about that. Excited that we're increasing the percentage of staff of color as well. I'm now going to give you an overview of some of the highlights. These are specific responses to what we discussed in 2017. It's presentation for 2018 implementation. So we want to give you the outcomes of those recommendations. We said that we'd improve our enrichment classes. We really wanted to focus on having STEM be a core piece of our enrichment courses. So there's a common curricula, common lesson plans. We had classes in robotics and technology pieces. We had a course and Legos and engineering with Legos. And we had our parents report that about 90% of those surveyed strongly liked this change. In particular, the 3-week sessions that we implemented. Why we did that was so that students could participate in 3 weeks of one class and 3 weeks of another, expanding their exposure to enrichment opportunities, and especially if they wanted to, they really loved a course that they may not have gotten into otherwise. This allowed them to have multiple options for that course. We implemented what we called a family-centered approach. We expanded participation for siblings so that if we had students that qualified, we didn't want a family having to decide if they would send their children to summer school because one was recommended or invited and one was not. So siblings of 4K through 4th graders were welcome, open. We opened enrollment to them, and 208 siblings took advantage of that this past year. And 77% of parents indicated they'd like to see this expanded to middle school siblings. So that's more on that later, but that's what we'd like to do. We continue to focus on the key transitions. If you recall, 4K to 5K, 5th through 6th, 8th through 9th. So in particular, last year, 5th through 6th was an area that we wanted to focus on. And rising 6th graders, so we call them 5th graders, but really rising 6th graders are able to attend ideally their prospective middle school if it's a summer school site, but otherwise a middle school setting so they can get acclimated to the culture, the climate of middle school, and what it's like to transition to a really important step in their academic career. Staff also felt that move to middle school improved their learning. Last but not least, we indicated that we would bring Read Up to Scale. That's the program where we give books to all students in summer school, and we brought it to the morning so that all students enrolled in summer school. So it wasn't only those who stayed after for MSCR were able to participate, and we had 18,000 books distributed to students in grades 4K through 4, and 5th graders were able to participate in author visits, in which they also were given 2 books of the author that came. It was a local Madison author. For the high school highlights, in particular, our focus was on the 8th to 9th transition. And as you know, these are students that are mostly our non-promotion students who are taking part in summer school, some of our most vulnerable students. So we really wanted to focus on them and the wraparound services that they have in summer school. So we had a more robust team support them. And what I mean by that is we had each site have their own transition counselor, which are guidance counselors who support the students, ensure that they're on track, meeting their requirements to be promoted. We used to have only one counselor that would share 2 sites. We have a family liaison who is currently a family liaison at Senate, continue into the summer, especially transitioning those couple of weeks after the school year ended and the start of summer school, to almost have a warm handoff to summer school. If there were any questions about promotion, any questions for families, she was willing and able to respond to them. We had Freshman 101 or High School 101 include a job shadowing component. And I'm really excited to mention a pilot that we implemented this last year because we wanted to honor the students that are in our 8th grade non-promotion class. And their peers are able to gain credit, but until they are actually promoted, they're actually considered rising 9th graders, their time in summer school was not counting towards credit. So we implemented this pilot in which a group of 8 students were able to earn high school credit. This is experiential learning credit. We partnered with MSCR and community organizations to gain this credit. They all got their Wisconsin Youth Leadership Certificate. 5 fully earned the .25 credit. The other 3 are still recorded their hours that they had worked. And what's really exciting is out of the 5, 4 were students with disabilities. We expanded options for first-time credit and experiential learning credit. Like I mentioned, within our opportunity for growth was really in work experience. We've seen 111% growth since 2015, and we added personal finance as a first-time credit. Last but not least, we said that we would identify students earlier for summer school, especially at the high school level. I think you'll recall me mentioning that high school is pretty much a paper-based application or paper-based enrollment. We want to get away from that. And so we worked with our programmers and our data team to pull student lists early, after semester 1, so that we could have early communication with families, early identification of students, and get them prepared for summer school right at the end of semester 1, so that they would know that they had to enroll or they should enroll in summer school. They can make plans accordingly. If in attachment B of your handout, you'll have the full board report from the evaluation team, but just some of the data points that I wanted to call out. This demonstrates the outcomes on the literacy and math assessments, the reading and math assessments in summer school. This shows the blue circles are the students that maintained or increased their literacy and reading or math levels in those specific areas in which they were working. And these are only students who have a pre and post test. And the breakdown is in K5, and the bottom portion is in 6-8. More information is in attachment B if you'd like to read the full picture. With 9-12, we were really excited to report that 90% of our students recovered credit this past summer. That compares to 83%, I believe. Yep, 83% from 2017. And especially in math, we were really excited because 92% of our students recovered credit, and those are some of our most failed classes, especially in algebra and geometry. 86% replaced a grade, and that compares to 74% in 2017. And I want to also just reiterate that we are constantly seeking ways to improve programming, constantly monitoring and evaluating our program. So in that vein, we survey parents about their thoughts and their feelings for summer school, what they'd like to see change, what they'd like to see included, what worked for them. And I'm excited to say that we had 130% growth in the families that participated in our survey. We had 500 families participate, and this is just some data I pulled out of it, but it's really helpful in continuing to look at the program and how we can continue to improve it. So I want to now take want to transition from the work that we've done in 2018 and now what the focus will be for 2019. The last 2 years that I've been in this role, we've really been focusing on elementary education and, well, specifically, let's say, 4K through grade 7. Now we really want to turn to secondary because we feel like we've solidified that foundation in the elementary and middle school years, and we want to focus on high school going forward for 2019. Of course, we will maintain what we think has been good outcomes for elementary, and but really want to focus our attention, and we want to provide you with some of our recommendations that we're looking to implement this 2019 summer school session. And the first is actually a change in the schedule. So something as simple as a schedule change, but the recommendation will be a Monday through Thursday week. When we were asking teachers that our own teachers that did not teach in summer school, why they weren't teaching, one of the most cited reasons was that they were wondering why we couldn't be a 4-day summer school experience. Other districts are Monday through Thursday, and so we heard them and we said, okay, we want our internal teachers. High school is one of the toughest positions to fill for our teaching staff and for our students, and so we're going to implement a Monday through Thursday schedule. We will extend the day slightly to 12:15 to absorb some of the lost minutes of instruction, but we worked very closely with our scheduler and with curriculum and instruction to ensure that we would not only meet DPI requirements for first-time credit still and for all our other areas, but also that we could still have a buffer for absences or other sort of incidentals that's going to happen in the summer. The second recommendation is around teacher pay, and that's to increase the teacher rate, the rate of pay, to $30 an hour for our internal high school teachers, and it would be $25 for external. The rationale behind this is twofold. First, these are courses that are for credit and for credit recovery, and we only have a finite number of teachers that are certified both at secondary and also in the content area. And what I've experienced in particular the last couple of summers is that we have fantastic internal teachers that want to teach summer school, but they're an art teacher, let's say, and they're certified in art, and they can't teach our Algebra 2 class that we need a teacher. And so this, we're hoping, will entice, in addition to the the 4-day work week. Also, the fact that it's 30 an hour, it will keep it at the 6 hours of planning and prep time. 4.5 student contact time will be exactly the same, except to be 4 days a week. But to realize this within our budget without requesting an increase, we're going to use funding from the credit recovery stipends. And if you'll recall, in 2017, it was an early action item around 9 on track that we would have stipends for certain classes. So we're talking Algebra 1, English 1, so students to keep them on track in 9th grade. We're not seeing enough of a difference in the outcome of students to really warrant the additional stipends, or the stipends being awarded for some teachers and not others. Plus, you of course have that uncomfortable situation where you have an English 1 teacher who's not getting, or is getting a stipend, and an English 2 teacher who isn't. They're both teaching credit recovery. They're both really important for our students and their students' success. So we will be cost neutral with this change by eliminating the stipends, and everyone will get the $30 an hour rate. As I mentioned already, with 8th grade non-promotion, we're going to expand the implementation of this strategy, especially around work experience. We were really excited about the students that got to participate last year, and we're going to offer every student the opportunity, if they would like, to earn 0.25 credits or higher. But what's really exciting is, in addition to the work experience, their youth leadership certificate that they will get, because it's even if it was an internship or an unpaid experience, we'll be offering them stipends this year to honor the time that they're working, and but it puts us in a situation where we don't have to worry about one student being 13 and unable to get a work permit, or being undocumented and not being able to get a work permit. This allows us to award stipends for students, and to fund that, we partnered with Lucier Education, Community Education Center, Goodman Community Center, and Vera Court, specifically their Bridge Lake Point location, to apply for an Emerging Opportunities grant. And they have been recommended for funding, which is fantastic. So this $20,000 will not only provide the staffing that these community centers need to support these students in these work experience opportunities, but also provide students with these stipends. Last but not least, within the 8th grade recommendations for non-promotion students, we're recommending a delayed start date for them. And that would be the 2nd week of summer school that programming would begin. The reason for this is that one of the data points we utilize is the forward exam. And the data does not come in time to make a recommendation for summer school, because it comes in mid to 3rd week of June. So what this will allow us to do is, 1, be more in alignment with board policy, because it refers to forward as the other data point that we should utilize. But it also means that we can have these students participate in high school, freshman 101, so like Perk Holder 101, Lancer 101, to be introduced to their to their high school. But then the students that really need to stay on for their 8th grade non-promotion summer school will stay on, and they will be able to do so with the right students. It'll be smaller class sizes, and so really it allows for more targeted skill instruction for the students that need it the most. So and another benefit of allowing or opening High School 101 in the beginning of summer school is that we can actually have an additional session for community students to participate in. The MSCR programming offered in August tends to fill up, so this would open more seats for them at the beginning of summer school. And last but not least, we're just going to continue to work on better data tools to pull these students, to pull this data on students who need credit recovery, who need to be enrolled in summer school early. We're going to explore more online enrollment options for families, so it's not just paper-based. And we're going to look into more first-time credit options. Art has been specifically mentioned due to the nature of instruction in a lab, so that it just lends itself nicely to a first-time credit recovery class. And so we'll continue to work with curriculum and instruction around that. And if you look at attachment A, that's your board report, the last page offers a couple other recommendations that we will be suggesting. There's just several that I want to pull out, but in particular, the reduction of sites from 20 to 18. So I'm going from a reverse order. And the reason for that is that we can recognize budget efficiencies by eliminating the administrative costs for those 2 sites. So you'll hear me in a minute talk about the budget, but that's about $90,000 that we will save by eliminating these 2 sites. we're not eliminating supports for students. On the contrary, we're going to take those staffing around behavior, around students with special education students, around English learners, and we will reallocate them to the other sites. We also will help us maintain parity for our sites. When we had looked to the sort of home site model for summer school, we weren't seeing better attendance rates. We weren't seeing better outcomes in that regard. And in fact, we're seeing some sites that had 85 students and some sites that had 350. So this is really, we're being very intentional with looking at feeders, patterns, looking at the sites themselves to try to increase that, that notion of parity across sites. And of course, then, like I had mentioned, the cost savings will be applied to increase resources for students with disabilities and English language learners. And last but not least, just a couple other that I want to draw to your attention around. We're going to continue to improve our enrichment classes, continue to focus on the key transitions, reserving slots for siblings, like I mentioned, and we're also going to explore options for advanced learners through talent and leadership development. But these are specifically advanced learners that wouldn't otherwise be identified as advanced learners, to open up opportunities to them. And this is in addition to Math Bridge. We're going to continue to offer our Math Bridge program, and this would be in addition to that. So attachment D is your budget summary, and you'll see there that there's a color-coded sort of corresponding cells to what has been changed. So kind of a quick reference for you, but just a couple highlights. You'll see that we were about $300,000 over the proposed versus actual this last year. And this was foreshadowed in the presentation last year, but this is the result of the change in the 25-hour per week versus the 30-hour per week number of hours that teachers were going to be working. Because the decision happened after July 1st, it wouldn't hit until the second half of the fiscal year, but because summer school spans 2 fiscal years, it hit this 2018 budget, even though it was for 2017 summer school. Otherwise, it's just demonstrating how we've reduced the budget overall by 1.65%. So we're actually not asking for a budget increase, but we're actually demonstrating that we've reduced the budget. We've gone through line by line, being really meticulous and looking how we can ensure program needs are met and well supported, but also being fiscally responsible to the overall organization and overall district. And then you can just see that the increase includes or the budget includes the increase for high school teacher pay still. It also includes a reduction of 2 sites that represents about, $90,000 in cost savings, like I mentioned. And then, next steps will be final Board of Education approval of this budget. So the fiscal year 20 budget, 2019 implementation on January 28th of 2019. So that's it. Are there any questions?
Well, I'll start. Thank you. Seems like we're making the changes we made worked, and that's good to see. And you learned from it and came back with some other ones. So one thing actually, can you talk a little bit more about that the first bullet on there, as to some of the feedback we've been getting through emails and some personal conversations about an opportunity to increase the amount of enrichment options that students have. And I noticed you put that in that first bullet on the one. So can you talk a little bit more about what you're thinking to make those options more available?
Absolutely. We still so any student who's in summer school is enrolled in an enrichment class, if not more than one. So it depends on if they've been recommended for literacy, for math, or for both. So if for both, we wanted to split the summer school session into 2 3-week sessions, if you will, so that a child could take adventures, or let's say engineering with Legos, but also taking learning outdoors, which is an experiential learning class. So they got 3 weeks of one and 3 weeks of the other. We also, though, have seats available for anyone in the community to enroll in enrichment, what we call enrichment only, and for just better choice of the word, to indicate only enrichment classes. And so families can also take those. In that model, a child is exposed to every single enrichment offering available because they're in 2 3-week sessions. So they're able to take a Phi-Ed focused class. They're also able to take art. They're also able to take an engineering with Legos class, and also robotics. So that's what, meaning when they're going to increase the opportunity to be exposed to enrichment, it's through that 3-week cycle that they would be able to do so.
Thanks. James will be next, but I would like us to start thinking more along the lines of giving equal importance to enrichment in arts as well as the STEM conversations. It's always about STEM, that more STEM, but arts and enrichment have to be given equal status.
For sure.
And well, we don't.
For sure.
We don't talk about it that way, and as a result, when it comes time to making choices, arts and stuff always the ones that, but it has to be equal. And until we start thinking that way and saying that out loud and so on, adding an A into the STEM.
For STEAM, yep.
And there's, until we start getting that more into our heads, it's not really going to happen.
Absolutely. And if you look at the, for the program recommendations for 19, that's exactly what we're doing. We're working with our.
That has to continue across the board. Not
Absolutely.
Just the summer school, so thanks, and continue that effort, because I'd like to see more of that.
Absolutely.
James, and then just cue me if you want in.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks for the presentation. Lots of great work here. Lots of good stuff coming out of summer school. And I can appreciate the improvement in the areas around enrichment. My question is more around the aspects of credit recovery and those students. And could you help me understand how we connect our summer program, the work in our summer program, to our vision of college and career readiness, and students needing to be on track. And I'm looking at your bullet here to further refine the program to pull data on high school students who need credit recovery. So I guess I'm asking more of a numerical question around how many students do we have that need credit recovery? Do we know that? And so what's the impact of our summer program on those groups of students?
Yep.
So can you just help me understand that?
Absolutely. Excellent question. So within our high school credit recovery, our biggest hurdle is identifying students early that will need additional support in the summer. So why we're further refining this program to pull the data is that we want to be able to start talking to families now about summer school. And if we know that students are, let's say, not doing well enough in their core classes, that they know that summer school will be an option, they know that they'll be enrolled, and they'll be enrolled early, and they have a seat waiting for them. So we're working with guidance counselors, mobilizing our school teams to really work on that. We also are going to have the program be finite enough, though, that it's going to be updating continuously, so that if a student, let's say, in collaboration, we have school teams working with teachers to say, the student's going to continue to work on XYZ skill, they're going to do some extra work for us, we think they're going to be able to get the credit and pass the class in time, then the conversation can shift to, well, we saw that we had John up here for credit recovery. John, you're going to still get a D in algebra. Would you be interested in credit replacement or grade replacement, so that they're still ready to take the class? If that changes the conversation, then it's, well, John, congratulations, you did an awesome job. You pulled a B in algebra. You're good to go. Have you thought about work experience? Have you thought about first-time credit options that we have available in personal finance and health? So that in order to try to mitigate, because there are students that absolutely need credit recovery, so it's knowing, though, the students early so that we could have those very nuanced, specific questions with families and with those students about their specific needs to be college and career ready, to meet their requirements for graduation. So that's what the sort of the refining of the program, so that it's actually a real live program. Counselors could write, can make notes in that as well, so that they know what they've mentioned to the student, what they've spoken to about the family. So we're really excited about the outcome there.
Yeah, and I can appreciate the plan work. I guess this point in time, can you make any statement about the impact of summer school on that group of students? And I appreciate what we're planning on doing, and I think all that's great. But can we talk about just this point in time today? What's the impact on summer school with the kids that needs to be on track? Can we talk numerically about that? I mean, how many kids are there in that category?
So what we refer to them as instances of credit recovery, because we have some students who take multiple courses to recover, right? So ideally, you have 2 sessions in summer school, so you could actually recover more than one class. Or we have semesters, right? Semester 1, semester 2, so you could actually recover a full year. So you'll see here.
You can recover a full year in summer school?
Yes, you can, because each class is worth 0.5 credit, which is a semester, and I mean some are 0.25, but for the core ones like algebra and geometry and English 1, those are all 0.5.
What is our impact on that group?
So of the 560 instances, which could be duplicated students, right? Because you could have some that are taking algebra and, let's say, English 1, 90% of them are recovering credit. So we do have some, of course, that aren't successfully recovering, and we looked at actually the sort of the why and what the follow-up is around those students.
Does that automatically mean they're on track, though?
If they recovered credit, it'll depend. I was going to say, and either of you want to chime in at any point, please. It depends how far behind. It depends on the grade level. It depends on, and why the data pull also allows us to have counselors look in real time about requirements, graduation requirements, along what they need in terms of prioritization.
We can't really say at this time the impact of getting students on. I mean, we're making progress, but we don't know how many.
For a numeric number, no. But what I can say is that in terms of one, putting students back on track, of course, but also counselors then can have that sort of that shift where they can have students recover multiple areas. Students, if it's appropriate, as in if they're not NCAA bound, right? If they're not anticipating participating in sports in college, they can also participate in Apex credit recovery, which is a whole other model of credit recovery in which they can recover multiple classes. So you have, it's because it's based on a platform where you can take multiple classes. So you can have a counselor work with a student to say, if this is the best for you, this is what you prioritize, and this is what you can be successful. And it depends on what grade they're in. I would say that, 9th and 10th, we can get them early, get them back on track, we'll have a better outcome than waiting till 11, 12. But within our enrollment of summer school students, we prioritize grades 12 and in reverse order so that we ensure that the 12th grade students who need summer school are getting enrolled first. And then, after that, especially with grade replacement even, if you have a B or an A, you're getting second priority to our students who had D's and C's, let's say.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
PJ, it's not actually where I wanted to start, but James' questions got me thinking. About 50% of the students who are invited don't attend. Do we have a sense of relationship between, is it students who 9 to 12 who are looking at credit recovery, grade replacement, non-promotion, how this breaks down in terms of who takes the invites and who doesn't?
That number is from our 4K8 number. So the percentage, the attendance rates, because when we recommend a student for summer school, right, that we use it based on certain criteria, tests and assessments, and GPA or report cards. Those are what we mean when they're invited. Credit recovery is a different group, or 9th grade through 12th is a completely different group because, like I was mentioning to James, it depends on what the class is. Hopefully it's being offered, which we offer all core classes, but then it's a different, let's say it's a different calculation of whether or not I prioritize Algebra 1 because I need 3 credits of math, or let's say English 1 because I need 4 credits of English. So it's a little bit more nuanced for the high school level.
So it's not quite an invite, or it's something different than an invite?
I would say it's something different than an invite at high school.
Can we start tracking that for next year?
Sure.
Trying to figure out both the
I think now that we have a data and we're building that system, we absolutely can.
Because
yeah.
I thought the invite covered K through 12.
No. It was, and even I would say K through 7, because non-promotion is a sort of a different group, right? So I would even say K through 7 or 4K through 7.
Yeah, if I could chime in on that, it's reminding me of the data we looked at, probably 5 years ago now, where we looked at students by age and how near or far they were based on credits. Do you remember that? Like all those tiers? And Bree's making me think a lot, in James's question, about how strategic we're being about how near or far you are, how old you are, like when is credit recovery the right strategy for you versus a more intensive alternative program, right? I mean, it's part of a larger strategy.
And I think with the focus on secondary for 2019, it's a perfect time to take a look at data and monitoring as we go into that. So I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
A couple questions around the four-day high school week, and both of them are kind of budgetary questions. One of them is there an impact? We're reimbursed via the revenue limit and equalization formulas based on minutes. Will there be minutes per student? Will that change? Will that impact that?
So we're going to extend the day slightly by 15 minutes a day to help absorb some of those minutes. And then within our 4K through 8, we're also extending their day by 15 minutes to help absorb those lost minutes as well. So in the net aggregate, it should be about the same, especially because if you look at our numbers, right, about 4,300 are 4K through 8 and only 1,500 are 9 through 12. And also within credit recovery and that model, we also have the ability for students to, even though let's say they've completed, like an Apex, for instance, they've completed a course, they're able to maintain their time and their minutes within the instruction by taking on, like I was mentioning to Howard, if you have, or just giving to James, if you have, sorry, James, if you have to recover Algebra 1, Geometry, and Science, you could do all three and continue to keep in the seat as long as you need to. And
then kind of the other side of that is, will the hours per week for the high school staff, I understand that that they'll be paid more an hour, but will they have the same number of weeks and the same number of hours? How does that, can you break that down?
Absolutely. Same number of hours, so 30-hour work week, so same as though there's no change. Same number of weeks. The reason being we wanted to have the buffer in particular too for any attendance issues, and it will be a change of $30
okay, so
for as though they were working a full week.
Compensation based on that, and it's not a shift.
Exactly. It's not a shift. It's just acknowledging that it's the 4-day versus 5-day.
On the 8th grade non-promotion and the delay with the forward, I guess if you can walk through a little bit about when students are invited and
absolutely.
I mean, I'm a little confused about that if we're waiting till the forward comes in to invite students.
Oh, no. Let me clarify that. Nope. Thank you for that question, so I can clarify. Same in terms of early notification. I mean, that's a big change that we have wanted to implement in summer school, is that the earlier families know about summer school, the more likely it will be that they attend, and that they've made changes to their plans for the summer so they can attend. Same notification process, which how the non-promotion data poll works is that after first semester, we will have a list of students, and it's again cumulative of 7th and 8th grade GPA in the core areas of literacy, math, science, and social studies. But at that point, and actually, to be honest, next month, schools will start communicating with families. We have early letters that say, at this time, your student may be recommended for summer school, or may have to attend summer school based on their current GPA. Work with your teachers, work with your school to improve their GPA, but we're notifying you now. The first data point that could take a student off that list, so meaning if they're below the threshold in that core area, is MAP. So the measures of academic progress, first in the fall administration of it. But that's in literacy and math. So we do not have a data point for science and social studies to remove a student off the list. And we also have forward for literacy and math if the student has demonstrated progress throughout the year.
So the fall MAP test would be fall 8th grade MAP test would qualify for promotion.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Yeah, that would be the first.
Again, I was confused. I thought it was the spring
yeah,
one.
I have read that board policy so many times to get it, and I still get confused. No, it's the fall administration of it.
Right. What other kind of just anecdotally, we continue to hear that special education students do not have necessary supports in summer school, and that they are either discouraged or told not to, discouraged or beyond that, with some students, particular disabilities. And I see that we have an increase in special education support this year, but it's still below what it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. And so I guess, how do you respond if someone comes to you and says, special education students are being excluded from summer school. And I know that we have 22% or 21%, but some specific disabilities and some ones, how do you respond to that? Because I don't know how to respond to it.
Right. No, it's a great question. I'm going to have Caroline jump in too, but every student, when we hear this recommendation invited for summer school, right? What we mean by that is we pull a list of students who qualify, right? Based on grades and based on assessments. And every site and every principal working with their school teams goes through every single student and looks at who is qualified, who should be attending summer school. And we have committed to supporting any reasonable accommodations that will help them access summer school. So we have school teams identify those reasonable accommodations, share those with us, and we ensure that we have those resources available to support the student. For example, if a student needs to be cathetered throughout the day, we will employ a nurse well into the afternoon to ensure that that student can be cathetered. If a student is deaf and hard of hearing, we have a one-on-one interpreter provided so that student could access the curriculum. In addition, though, to that, we also work with our central office team and with other school-based teams to look over the list and ensure that there is access for all students who qualify for summer school. And I'm going to have Caroline jump in a little bit more, too.
I think maybe you've answered it.
Well, I was going to see if you wanted to talk about IDEA and FAPE.
I guess that kind of two pieces of that. One is that the students who qualifies, those would be the invitees, and so that doesn't cover high school. And secondly, we also have a lot of students who don't, quote, qualify, who also attend summer school. And if you're a student with disabilities who desires to, but is not an invitee, are the same supports provided.
Yeah, so in terms of our legal obligations during summer school, they're slightly different than the regular year, right? And so we don't implement IEPs in summer school because, we're not required or mandated to implement as a part of FAPE under IDEA. So we've really made a concerted effort to provide equitable access to students. And I think this is sort of the nuance of the students who qualify for summer school and can gain access to our summer school program through reasonable accommodation. So our equitable access lies there. If a student needs to have a continuation of their IEP due to an extended school year situation, then they would be given that programming through that under FAPE, through IDEA in the summer, through an extended school year or ESY. And that's a completely separate program from our summer school. So
I guess that do we have any sense of what the cost would be to just provide universal access and universal supports for any students with disabilities who desired to do summer school? I mean, do we have any sense at all?
It will depend on the IEP, the level of support. I could say that almost 10% of the budget currently is just SEAs and CC teachers. If you look at the line, special education services, I don't know if I could numerically come up with a number.
No, but I think that we would really have to think about our strategy as it relates to summer school, because is it a universal strategy or is it more of a targeted strategy? And right now, our summer school program really is a targeted strategy. It's a 6-week intervention for students who have skill deficits in the areas of reading and math, and we really want to be mindful. We're also
talking about enrichment. We're talking about expanding first-time credit. We're talking about experiential learning. I mean, if it was just a targeted intervention, then I wouldn't see an inequity emerging here. But if we're talking about it being more than a targeted intervention, which is what I'm hearing, then I see not legal inequities, but ones that exist. And I understand that FAPE doesn't cover summer school, and I get that. But if we're the enrichment access to these enrichment classes, we have that any kid who doesn't need unreasonable supports can access those. If a kid needs unreasonable supports, he or she cannot access those. And so I guess that going forward, I'd really like to see it examined what the cost would be to do that. And if the number's huge, then we say no. But if it's not. What's that?
Maybe we wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we say no. Two other just really quick things. And, three things, I'm sorry. The 4K to 5K transition, I'm not quite sure what we're doing now and what you're talking about there. How many 4K to 5K kids enroll? What kind of programming do we give?
Absolutely, I can give you the exact number.
This is a place where this isn't a targeted intervention. This is something.
Absolutely. So we had 360 in our K-4 program. Of that, 49 were not in district, which we acknowledge as they were not in an MMSD 4K program or one of our partner locations. So these were new to the Madison School District. This was their first experience. We call it the Jump Start, getting ready for kindergarten program. And so within that, our curriculum around 4K is very much getting ready for 5th grade. So, for 5K for kindergarten or 5th grade. So they're the curriculum itself really looks to support those students, but also if it's a student who's never been in an MMSD school, that sort of warm welcome to our community, to MMSD. It allows us to communicate continuously throughout the summer with those families. And within the 4K students in particular, we last year did some work with home visitation of families. So we had some, ideally their prospective kindergarten teacher had the opportunity to meet with the family and get to know the student. That was a grant funded program, so limited and not, I don't believe, renewed in terms of going forward, but that's going to be what we're going to meet with now for this year, our 4K team, now that we have the Director of Early Learning in place. We can really think about creatively what that means for our 4-year-olds, our youngest students, and what that transition could look like. So more to come.
And it's the full 6 weeks, and it's a
full 6 weeks. They're actually, they actually do not transition into different courses, so they have embedded within, they're so little, right? Especially they have them embedded within the 4 hours. So it's very much focused on literacy with, of course, fun, play activities, social, emotional development. We also have, if you recall from last year, we have an EA in every classroom. So you have 2 adults for a maximum of 18 teachers. So we have a 9 students to 1 adult ratio.
And those are all in our sites or any in the community?
All of our 4K sites.
All right, very, very, very quick on a couple of other things, just for the future. On the statistics, the fuller statistics, you've got little data points on advanced learners, on the economic free reduced lunch, not free reduced lunch, and the special education. But kind of the full analysis you did around race and ethnicity around that in the future would be good to have.
Sure.
And then I guess the other thing is that I think that if we're looking, James asked, do we know what the impact is? And we've got kind of a natural experiment here of invitees, non-invitees. Mm-hmm. And I think that in the future for analyses, it would be good to look to see, if somebody qualified to be invited and didn't attend, do they have differential outcomes from students who did choose to attend? I mean, I think that there's a natural experiment there. So that's about it. Thank you, and thanks for the work.
Oh, absolutely. And one other piece, too, with high school, I should clarify that while we don't invite in the same method of an invitation letter, any student who's working to recover credit is notified. So it's very much that we work with our school counselors very closely. So when we talk about that's why the number around invited students is really hard, because automatically if you're deficient in credit, you're getting a phone call, you're getting a communication, you're getting communication about summer school.
And this is all coordinated with the at-risk plan too.
I was going to say, Caroline also sees at-risk, so we could even more so than in the past are aligning it well. And I should mention, any student who's on the at-risk list are automatically invited to summer school.
Unless they're 9 to 12, then they're contacted, not invited.
Exactly, yeah. And then maybe we should think of a better way of, encourage. There we go, encourage to attend.
Yeah, I think we need to get the language out and make that distinction.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, done. Okay, Gloria?
Just a quick question on attendance. You mentioned you were trying to increase attendance. I wasn't here when you talked about that. Is increasing attendance based on that strategic approach of those who need it. Is that what you're?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Ensuring that the students who need summer school, who need this very specialized intervention are coming. And if they're not, identifying barriers to why they're not coming and making sure that we can support them as best as possible.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
And then the increase in the arts and all that extra stuff, is that for those students as well, or is it something you're opening up to?
Oh, that is for all students. Yeah, that is for
Okay.
any student who is in kindergarten through 7th grade will have exposure to enrichment, and that will include, and I'm actually really excited, some of the courses that we've been working on I'm hoping they come to fruition for next year, but they will look at, one's called nature art, with going out into the outdoors and picking leaves and twigs and creating art out of that. So I think we have some really special things coming down the pipeline, but it would be K-7, of course, developmentally. You're not going to have that necessarily for a
Gotcha.
middle school student, but you'll have the equivalent for them to access.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Gloria.
Kate?
So I have a question that's maybe a slightly off topic, but I wondered if you could speak a little bit to year-round school and what, if any, learnings we could pull from this
The what?
year-round school.
I'll start.
And it's a little off. So like
I was going to say, I can start from my
heard a lot of
narrow
feedback.
lens.
We heard a lot of, maybe just as context and give you a minute to think.
Yeah.
We heard a fair amount of feedback during our strategic framework listening sessions around year-round school from a variety of stakeholders. And, you know, I think it's something that kind of pops up every once in a while that families are interested in, that staff are interested in, or that's beneficial for students.
Yep. I mean, I can respond in my narrow lens, but I'll let either of you guys in addition. But what I think that the benefit that summer school can really have for year-round school is, especially in terms of student outcomes and being able to assess where the students are for the incoming teacher. So this information is an IC. The summer school report cards are an IC. In Infinite Campus, the assessments are an IC. So if I'm a teacher and I know that my student has attended summer school, I'm able to go in and see where Johnny ended his summer school experience. And then correspondingly being able to really hit the ground running with him. We're also looking within summer school, some of the, you'll see that we have a data line, or excuse me, a budget line for instructional technology. So really being, you're utilizing all the tools we can, all of the diagnostics that we can for our students, especially around programs like Lexia that we have during the regular school year. We implement in summer school to see how the student has progressed over the summer. We can have that data point for teachers. So I think the more sophisticated we can be with the tools that we have, and we could have the receiving teachers have that information. So at least in terms of my narrow lens, that's one of the benefits I could see for the year-round schools, that it bridges the end of the previous school year with a different teacher, potentially a different school, with the receiving or the incoming school.
So just a couple things to add. I'll try to be helpful. I was thinking about, TJ, even what you asked about special education, and I was going to chime in afterwards. My brain took a little bit to catch up, but right, there is the staffing piece in the summer that's always a challenge. And, year-round school, if you think about it, you'd have highly qualified, certified people that could teach both during the year and in the summer. We did look more deeply at the special ed piece in the summer, and struggled with the staffing piece, struggled about what model do you start with. Reconvening IEPs that might extend through the summer. If you had year-round school, your IEP would be written, right, for around a sort of a different time frame in an IEP. And then I was also thinking about just high-quality materials and the consistency of high-quality materials that you'd use both during the regular school year and the summer. So those were just a couple of pieces, but staffing being the big one that cropped up for me. We always, even though we have made huge gains in hiring and staffing and paying teachers, we still have shortages for special ed certified, bilingual certified. So there are some of those issues that we'd want to, think about. So I don't know, Kate, if that.
No, it's a really helpful response, actually.
Yeah, just
in
some
terms
things
of
to.
consistency and in staffing and relationships, et cetera.
Yeah.
And as we look at building and diversifying our alternative programs, it could be, a small thing to pilot that we think through. Small, right? But it could be interesting, particularly for some of those constituents.
Yeah, it's been a while
It's a little
since
off topic for
yeah,
this
it's a little off
discussion,
topic. I looked at it deeply years ago, all of the research at that time. I'm probably a little off now, 5 years off. There's probably some newer research on year-round schooling, but at that time, there were no clear benefits, meaning one wasn't necessarily better than the other, traditional versus year-round. But at that time, I was convinced that it had to do with use of intercession, which is you would have instead of summer school, right? You'd build a different sort of calendar with intercessions at several times during the year. And I think for me, the main advantage of the year-round calendar is, this is my personal opinion, I think it's a more humane way of working and being in school for both students, families, and staff. It's an enormous transition, but it's worth exploring in the future. We'll see.
I mean, I
as we're
agree,
in
and
a
I'm in
phase
this
of
role.
kind of innovation and piloting small, we piloted a 20 student alternative school last year.
Absolutely.
Like, that was the scale I was thinking of.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Bree.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Okay, wait.
All right.
Yeah, with the new changes comes new opportunities and things to consider. So to kind of summarize this, we are going to get a motion that includes obviously the budget, the Monday through Thursday schedule, dropping the 2 sites. Anything else in this motion that, other than those 3 things, that we'll be asked to vote on?
I'd like the schedule with the teacher pay. The increase in teacher pay.
Well, that's kind of in the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're generally voting on the budget.
So those 3 things are what we're going to be asked to vote on.
Yep.
Primarily, okay.
Primarily,
All right.
yeah.
Good job, and it is good. It is good job, and you presented really well too. Thanks.
Thanks, team. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. Thanks, you guys.
So shifting now to BEP report. So Kate, James, and Gloria, feel free to add context to what we're going to hear today.
These are your contextual folks coming up.
Yeah.
Well, you'll be able to, maybe give some insight to us.
I just got to say, I mean, our staff has been just wonderful in keeping us on target, guiding us through this process. So, in bringing their knowledge and experience to the table was really helpful.
So if you would, please introduce all yourselves to us.
Yeah, I can jump in. We'll start over here. This is Sarah Kanevi. She's a PBS coach at Glendale.
And you got to talk louder, too.
This is Patrice Hutchin. She's a dean of students at West High School. This is Quinn Craw. He's our coordinator of behavior education for the district. And this is Cynthia Moore. She's a she's a universal systems strategist for our team here at central office. So these are our 5 district staff that have supported our ad hoc committee, and we're here tonight to share our recommendations with you. Just to sort of get started here, to clarify, what we're looking for tonight is feedback on our draft recommendations. Our ad hoc committee meeting next Monday will be used to kind of pool feedback we received tonight to make final adjustments, and then we'll be putting forward a motion asking for you to accept our recommendations at the January full board meeting. Tonight we're going to give you an overview of the revision process, the timeline, and what we see as our next steps. And again, just asking in particular for your suggested edits and looking forward to the conversation around our recommendations themselves. Slide 3 is just a quote from our strategic framework that sort of summarizes what we've been doing over the last 6 months and taking a step back, making sure that we have the right district-wide support for our schools. The process included convening an ad hoc committee, beginning by recognizing that we're not starting from scratch and that lots and lots of input and reporting has happened over the implementation of the BEP over the first 5 years. And so we were reviewing existing stakeholder input. We were charged with gathering additional stakeholder input and then ultimately drafting some recommendations. And our committee decided to divide those recommendations into 3 categories. So policy, the document itself, resources, and any supports needed to actually support the plan in schools, and then implementation itself and the way that we're supporting our schools and putting systems in place that support that implementation. So to cover our timeline, we first convened our committee in July, and if we're sitting here then in January with recommendations, it means we've been on a fairly accelerated timeline. The reason for that is that we wanted to land on recommendations around the end of first semester so that we can then move forward second semester while our schools and teams are still at it every day, so that we can spend second semester preparing for implementation as opposed to waiting until the very end of the year to propose some changes that then we're trying to prepare schools to implement over the summer. August through October was more or less our input phase. We were seeking input as a committee primarily from our school-based teams. And so we invited over the course of those meetings teams from Blackhawk, East, Wright, Glendale, and Orchard Ridge wanting to hear from elementary, middle, and high school. And in very simple terms, wanting to hear what's working and what isn't. That also included a data review, and Quinn will cover that in a little more detail. Once we hit November and December, we started to begin shifting from gathering input to proposing recommendations. We met with our high school principals in November, wanting to hear from them sort of as an entire group to make sure that we were, since we had only met with one high school, we wanted to make sure that we had a thorough understanding of their perspective. And then began shifting. During that time, and Quinn will cover this as well, we were also seeking student input, staff input, and family input in a variety of ways, in addition to some community members. Moving forward with our timeline, here we are on January 7th, and we're sharing our draft recommendations with you all. Again, as I mentioned, our ad hoc committee meeting next Monday will be used to finalize these recommendations, and then they'll be presented again, looking for your acceptance at the end of January. Looking ahead to February, we've been working on actual revised behavior education plan policy, hoping to put forward an elementary version, a middle school version, and a high school version that we would then present in draft form to the work group on February 4th. Paralleling what we're doing in January, our ad hoc committee meeting on the 11th will be used to finalize those draft policies that then would be forwarded to you all at the full February meeting, asking for approval of those new policies. Our ad hoc committee meeting will be working on those drafts over the course of January so that they're ready to be presented to the work group in early February. Turn it over now to Quinn to talk a little bit more about the logistics of gathering feedback in the committee itself.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone around the table for participating in the ad hoc committee. Dean and TJ and Mary and Ahmad, you've also been a part of it too, although maybe not direct members of that are named, but it's been a really supportive group, and the work would not have advanced without the commitment, so thank you. We started with case studies, as Jay alluded to, and that data profile was looking at our culture and climate survey data for each of the schools that Jay named, looking at what percentage over the data available, which in most cases was 3 to 5 years, students, staff, and families felt like they belonged at school. We looked at a few other things, consistency of behavior consequences, etc. That overview from our school teams led to a discussion on implementation, how schools went about their process, and other influences that kind of pushed them either on course or off course. And it was a very open and honest discussion about what was working and what was not that shaped a lot of the recommendations and the policy as we've been working on it. Staff input was split between online survey and feedback sessions. We received over 1,600 responses from our staff online survey, and we created a report back in the fall that was very comprehensive and kind of summed everything up with that report. And our feedback sessions were at each of the feeder high schools during contract time, which was something that when we were in discussion with MTI was an ask to make sure that staff had that opportunity and that we respected their time. We also had family input, again, kind of the same process, online survey and feedback sessions. We corrected, I think, a communication lapse with Memorial High School feeder pattern in early October. It was the first group that we met with, and communication just wasn't out strong enough, and we did reconnect with that group. Overall, we had an opportunity to hear from families at each of the 4 feeder pattern high schools. And last but not least, we had student input. Our focus groups happened at Falcon Mendota Elementary, Sherman and Jefferson Middle School, and then La Follette and West High School. And the themes ranged from everything to more consistent implementation, to fairness in the classroom and in the hallways, to what are we going to do about disruptions, to how are we going to support racial justice. And recommendations from our MSAN students mirrored that. The stories and experiences that we pulled from those students aligned directly to family and student input. There was clear alignment as we went through the process. Our principal input really started before the ad hoc committee and kind of prepping for this year, really back in May when we did some policy change that has had an impact on this year, which was changing some pretty specific policy to mirror what we had heard from principals. So it's been ongoing for, I would say, the entire calendar year of 2018. We brought them in through Principal Bulletin and the Principal Operations meeting to get very specific feedback from that group. And as Jay alluded to, we also brought in our high school principals for an ad hoc committee discussion. The Guiding Coalition, created with the first or second year of implementation of the behavior education plan, took on kind of a new shape this year to really think about what way we needed to think about racial justice and disproportionality in the behavior education plan, looking at it from policy implications to implementation. It was a nice community-based collaboration. That group created its own set of recommendations, which for the most part mirror the recommendations you're seeing tonight. We did come back to that group one more time before this group in December to make sure that there was alignment and that team had an opportunity to look at things. And last but not least, we made sure that we had a connection to MTI. Originally, we were meeting with them through safety and security. That has taken on a life of its own given some of the state statutes, and so we wanted to focus the team more on behavior. We've met a handful of times, and it's been a healthy discussion on staff feedback, recommendations, and policy changes to this point. I'm going to hand it back to Jay.
So once we kind of wrapped up our November meeting, then our committee shifted to analyzing all the feedback. This lists and just cites that we considered all the feedback that we gathered, whether it was case study notes, online or in person, feedback shared by staff or families, our principals, students, and again, existing reports. We worked with our research, accountability, and data department to then analyze all the notes from all those feedback sessions to then create a report that was shared with you all on our staff and family feedback. And then our committee has been kind of poring over the rest of that as we draft our recommendations that we've shared with you tonight. Barb, can you advance this one there somehow? I don't know if I clicked the wrong something. There we go. Sorry, there we go. Across all of those sources that I mentioned, we heard some very strong and consistent themes that we believe are kind of threaded together and connect across what we heard from students, what we heard from families, what we heard from our staff. Primarily from students and from families, we heard the need for efficient and consistent response to any classroom disruptions. This is from kids going home at night to share that something happened and didn't feel like it was dealt with efficiently, or that in this class this happened and in that class that happened and the response wasn't similar. We heard that from some of our teachers as well, feeling like we need to be better at responding to situations as they pop up. Very strong feedback from our staff around the need for expanded mental health resources and also supports for students with intensive needs. And as a committee, we've discussed that we see a very strong connection between these two. Recognizing that if our school-based teams are dealing with students where perhaps they don't have the supports that they need in that environment, then that's going to hold and draw their attention, which makes them a little bit less available to deal with, what may be on the scale of incidents that day, a little bit lower intensity in a classroom, which then would lead our students and classroom-based staff to feel that that response isn't efficient enough. So our recommendations, we feel, will comprehensively address all three of these in a very comprehensive way. And I'll turn it over to Quinn now as we kind of shift towards highlighting some of our recommendations, starting with policy, and then we'll move on to resources and implementation.
And for clarification, when we say policy, we're really focused on the grid for behavior response. We see policy as the entire document, this being level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, talking about anything from classroom managed incident all the way up to expulsion. So the core of these policy changes, and you can see 5 more major themes listed here, was really to make sure that these hit on the elements of racial equity and addressing disproportionality. That is still why we have our behavior education plan. It is what our our ad hoc committee talked about at length. How are we still supporting that? What is going to be different moving forward, and how do we continue to impact some numbers that we see that might not be changing? Some of those specific policy recommendations, we'll get to that, I think, more in depth than others, specifically the last 2. So removing the refusal to cooperate code, that has a lot of data behind it. Really making sure that we support staff and students in any type of classroom disruption, but also noticing a trend that refusing to cooperate truly disproportionality impacts, or truly impacts through disproportionality our students with disabilities and our African American students. And I can go further into that if there are questions about that. We updated the dress code to really reflect more gender neutral language, but we also want to work with our community partners in making sure that it is something that the community supports and is just continuously discussed in an effort to be current and socially just. I think all of these things respond in different ways to the input that we heard. That first one really was a key theme from students to staff to families, and everything else was for simplicity. So that's just kind of a general overview in the direction that we went. And we feel pretty good about where we've landed. It's been out in the open for over a month now. And this is one area, the last thing I'll say is an area that we'll continuously come back to. Year after year, being current, being responsive to what our schools and our families and community are saying. Yep. And so as we know that the grid is one thing, we're also working behind the scenes to revise the entire document. Currently, depending on the form, whether elementary or secondary, it's pretty lengthy. We really want to make sure it's family, student, and staff friendly. That means really getting to the core of what we're trying to say, being punchier, being more specific, having more visuals, more grids, more graphics to enhance our points. All part of the feedback that we heard in an effort, one of the strong themes that Jay named, to be effective and efficient. We want to be actionable. I know that's something the board has asked, and we see that same thing living in the document. That third point I think is so critical, and the ad hoc committee is something that we talked about. We want our schools to have a voice. Each school has a story. There are really positive things happening in our schools on a day-to-day basis, and our building leaders, our teachers, our student services members, they've done some incredible things, and we can learn from one another, and we want to amplify that in this document. At the base of it all is really getting back to foundational systems and naming those foundational systems and giving our staff and families a picture into how to do that. It's one thing that we heard might be missing in some cases. Now, how to do that requires a lot of pages, and so this next slide really gets at additional guidance. So we want to make sure it's concise and effective in getting the message across, and we know that there's going to need to be guidance through different parts of the behavior education plan in kind of bringing school teams along, because different teams do different things. So you'll also see, as we put this together, additional guidance that we want to bring in special education teams, we want to bring in multi-tiered systems of support, we want to bring in student services to make sure that we are really offering staff and families the best route to integration and implementation.
Shifting to talk about resources and kind of recognizing that the challenge that we're facing is trying to make recommendations around resources, but also instinctively making kind of recommendations around what do we need to put in the budget heading into next year. But being mindful that what our committee is intending to do here is take more of a multi-year kind of aggressive tack towards larger expansion of some of these systems and supports that we're acknowledging are sort of lacking. And so we work our way down, in addition to proposing to expand our behavioral health in schools from 8 schools up to 12 schools, adding 4 new ones. Our mental health team is also going to explore putting site-based health centers in our high schools, and they've already taken some of those initial steps, and our committee believes that those two in tandem would do quite a bit to support the need for expanded mental health services. We're proposing a pilot feeder pattern social worker that would be focused more on neighborhoods and families whose students attend multiple schools. We'd be able to work with neighborhood centers, work with the city and the county to provide more integrated support across the district through what our families see. We think it's an innovative way to add student services support that might also help with transitions across schools and might also help our student services teams in schools collaborate even better. And depending on how that pilot would go, then in the following years asking to expand that pilot. We're also looking for expanded training on those universal practices that Quinn mentioned, and so that's a $200,000 ask that would result in more targeted PD within our schools and outside of our schools that staff could attend, ideally wanting every single one of our schools and staff in those schools to take steps forward in their understanding and ability to deliver those 4 core foundational practices. Our committee has also talked at length about the need for additional capacity in our alternative settings, and we believe that some of this will live in special education. We also believe that some of this will live in the Office of Youth Re-Engagement. And because those are different departments, it's been harder for us to make a recommendation about how quickly or what the budget would look like. We are hoping to invite Armando Hernandez, who's the assistant director who oversees our mental health programs, John Harper, and also Paris Eccles to our committee meeting next Monday, hoping we can talk in a little bit more detail about making recommendations in those areas before we finalize. Shifting then to implementation. We've routinely had in the very first days of summer, a teaching and learning institute, and we'd like to have either a social emotional or might rebrand it as universal practices to be a little bit more of a fit with the way that we're writing up the document, a universal practices institute for our school teams to attend and then get sort of a jump start as we launch the document and make sure that our teams have plans in place before we break for summer so that when they come back, they're ready to go. The document itself will have revised goals and different metrics, recognizing that we want to measure our progress on things other than suspensions and other disciplinary incidents. We're also hoping to improve our ability to both implement interventions, but also to document them and therefore monitor their effectiveness. We feel that there's a gap here, and that's across the range of interventions that we deliver in MMSD. We want to get better with documentation, and this starts with our leadership teams, then into our response teams, but ultimately into our school-based staff, so that from classroom to classroom and school to school, what's being documented is more consistent so that we have better fidelity to our data and analyzing where things are working, where they're not, and also expanding our use of restorative practices. You can see that that's called out as one of our 4 core practices. So with that, we'll open it up for conversation. And again, just looking for any feedback you have, anything you'd like our committee to dig more deeply into next Monday when we come back together to finalize these. And hoping that kind of in a comprehensive way, obviously, we didn't find a magic silver bullet that would address all of our challenges. We ended up with a comprehensive list of many different things that we think together will move us in the right direction over the next few years.
All right, thank you. So, fellow board members, excuse me, but I'm going to invoke chair privilege and ask my questions first, so I'll be able to pay more full attention to yours. I have 3, starting with policy. Numbers 2 and 3, you're talking about rewriting completely some initial sections and then creating some differentiated interventions. I'm hoping that I won't see this the Thursday before I have to vote on it. I mean, is there a draft in the works? How far along are you on this, and when will we see it? Because I'd like to perhaps comment on it even before next week.
Yeah, so again, just to kind of clarify, what we're hoping we'll do at the January meeting is that you accept our recommendations, and then we'd use the month of February to consider the new policy, the revised documents. Our ad hoc committee will actually look at a very rough draft of that policy. So we have one that's in the works now that's kind of defaulting to a high school version of it. And as our committee discusses that and as we work with our teams, build those out over the course of January so that by the end of January we have them to you in draft form, elementary, middle, and high school. We'll then present them to you formally at the February instructional work group, which will still be 3 weeks in advance of an ask for approval.
Okay, so you're just asking us to vote on allowing you to go ahead and do that?
Correct.
Okay.
Dean, can we
Got
just
something to follow
further
up on?
clarify? I just want to know what the January vote is. When to accept the recommendations, what does that mean? Does that mean that the dollar amounts we built in the budget? Does that mean that all these things that are being proposed will go forward? I understand how it relates to the policy pieces, and that will be a February vote on the exact policy language, but the rest of this, what's the January vote? I think that we need to know this for the discussion tonight.
I can comment on that, TJ. It's, I think, similar to the ERO ad hoc recommendations when they were accepted by the board. It's sort of the formal handoff of the best thinking of this team and the ad hoc to the full board, and then you guys do what you want to do with those recommendations in the end.
And so the budgetary things and things like that don't.
You're not
I mean,
obligated.
okay.
Yep.
So it's not a
Okay.
matter of amending them before. Okay, that's what I was trying to get.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Accepting
all right,
that.
that's
Yeah.
helpful for
Yeah.
that clarification.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Dean, but I
No,
thought
that was helpful. Then down to resources, numbers 3 and 4. You're talking for one full-time social worker to act as this feeder, you're calling it, for the entire school district? And you want to do it at a pilot? I mean, doesn't seem enough.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah,
you gonna, I mean, synthesize it down? I mean, how many schools is one social worker gonna work on? Is it, can you explain what your vision is on that? Because one just doesn't seem enough.
So I'll give an example of how we would envision this feeder pattern social worker working. So I'll use Memorial High School as an example, understanding the school community fairly well.
And then, let me answer this question. And number 4 also, so while you, maybe just answer these both at the same time. The first one, please get a little bit more specific. And the second one, what do you mean by continued work with these other groups here?
Okay, so taking the first one, let's take Memorial High School as a feeder pattern with its elementary schools and its middle schools. There's a student services team in each of those schools, but the families have kids that might go to Toki, might go to Orchard Ridge Elementary, and then they've got kids at Memorial as well. Our social workers in schools, you've now got one in each of those schools connecting with that family and trying to provide support. If we had a feeder pattern social worker that was more connected to the family and whatever that family needed, and they were also connected to the Meadowwood Neighborhood Center, then we've got an advocate on behalf of the district that can connect with that family, stay in connection with the student services staff at the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, and we believe would provide more of the glue that holds our student services teams together. So there would be one person that would then work across that Memorial High School feeder pattern, providing a sort of flexibility to support kids in a variety of neighborhoods, but primarily through connecting with families. They would also connect with our intensive support team here in central office that also primarily works on an individual student basis. Together, we think that they can do more of a family approach. The hope would be—
Following that, but
yeah.
help me, are you saying that this pilot is going to work just out of one high school? And then in this pilot, how big a caseload are you expecting this person to handle?
Yeah, great question. So we're starting in one feeder pattern, meaning just to see what it's like to have a social worker that is supporting families in an entire attendance area. If we find that that person is able to do really powerful work, but is immediately overwhelmed by those needs in terms of, they're not able to support and connect with student services staff in the buildings as much, we might learn through the pilot that we actually would be best to have 2 feeder pattern social workers. And we believe that a pilot is the right way to start this. The district has, as I understand it, had trials of this where there was a social worker assigned to a particular neighborhood in the past. We believe that this is a really innovative way for us to try out a different way of using resources. If the pilot is wildly successful, then the ask would likely be, can we expand to all of the feeder patterns in the coming years?
Okay, well, having some familiarity with how social workers work, the caseload is important to monitor so that the person has something that's doable. And in many cases, social workers with what you're describing to me, plus the logistics of getting around in that neighborhood, there's time involved. So what can that one person actually do in an 8-hour period when they're traveling all around different schools? Like, this caseload's not going to be high. It might be 10. And that might be, it might be less in order to be effective. So I'm assuming you guys know about this better than I do, but I have a lot of years of experience in working with social workers, and I know that their caseloads can get out of hand really quick because of lack of resources. So if we want to do this, we want to pilot it in a way that sets them up to succeed and not to automatically fail by loading them up with a caseload that's unrealistic. So that would be one point that I would make. And then similarly with how this person interacts with number 4 here, and how number 4 staff can actually assist this person, how that's all coordinated to me seems to be a way where that could work, but that coordination is key so that information can get all passed. So I like the idea. I think that what you're describing in number 3 in the pilot is almost something that I'd support right away, with a better explanation as to where they're working and caseload management. So I'd like to see something more specific on that going forward. Then number 5, I'm not certain that I can support that at all. I'm not certain that I can accept a lot of what the ERS recommendations were, particularly when the middle school recommendation to reduce special ed by 2. On the surface, that was going, wait a minute, that's flies in the face of everything we hear. So I'm not certain I would, I need a whole lot more information on that before I could support something like that.
So I actually, going back to your initial question, I'm just wondering if anyone else from our team would like to jump in and talk a little bit more about how you would see that feeder pattern social worker, perhaps also interacting. I didn't answer your question.
Yeah, please. I haven't heard from anyone else, so please help me out if you
A lot
can.
of us at the table bring a social work background, so your point is well taken and appreciated, that we could just overwhelm a person and then they become ineffective and not meaningful for any particular school. As we were thinking about it, I thought about it more in my head as a practitioner in an elementary school currently. I thought about it more like the JFF model, to be honest, in helping coordinate the service. So right now, myself at
JFF is
Joining Forces for Family. Thank you.
And they have worked countywide and work a lot with our families and students.
Right, and so like right now at Glendale, I'm supporting a family, and Ashley at Senate is supporting the same family, and then someone at La Follette, Michelle at La Follette, might be supporting the same family. So we're duplicating the work, and we're not coordinating with what we're doing with families. And so it would be essential that this person's role is like coordination and direct service, so that it's not this layer of unattainable support for school, but it's looking at some of our most intense families that cross these grade levels, and then really being able to support schools and teachers to do that work and not duplicating. So that's kind of how I'm framing it up.
I agree.
As simple as like even coordinating monthly meetings and facilitating, let's talk about this overlap in work and where we can become more efficient. And right now that just doesn't happen.
That would be a good start, and then from there you could implement higher level interventions, which is what is needed here.
Exactly, and really roll up your sleeves related to housing, mental health support. So I mean, those things that we don't get to that layer of case management within the school.
Yeah.
And I think that coordination too with the student services staff, I think as well within each of those schools in that area. So being able to bring the social workers together within all those elementary, middle school, and high school to have those discussions if they're focusing on a family in particular. So I think it's coordination, like you said.
Good. Thank you. That's where I'd like to see this go, and I think that's what's needed. And I think that all of us want to see that level of collaboration, much higher level.
Exactly.
Thanks. I'm done, guys, so who's next? Ahmad.
Thank you, first of all. I really appreciate the conversation around eliminating the racial disparity. I think eliminating the refusal to cooperate is a good first step. I was curious, can you talk about, if anything, what else you're doing to try to reduce those biases? Because I'm worried that for example, the disruption of class time, that code may just become the new refusal to cooperate, and we'll see the same type of disproportionality.
I'll start, and then anyone else please jump in. So I think part of what we were getting at with our 4 core practices is to more comprehensively impact racial bias. Doubling down on our culturally and linguistically responsive practices as the first part in really naming how that is going to impact all the work we do, sets the standard and then gives us an opportunity to show infusion into the other practices, both through restorative practices, social emotional learning, and just our universal foundation framework of PBIS, so positive behavior intervention and supports. Schools are doing variations of all of those things, and we want to make sure that we're providing a supportive blueprint to bring it all together, which we think will help reduce the disparities at a much faster clip than what's happening now. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think it also speaks to helping strengthen schools' data practices as well. So being able to look at their data and being able to also look at so which of the subgroups are we seeing disproportionate data, and helping them build their capacity around looking at their data and having those conversations. So supporting the schools to have those conversations around which subgroups are we seeing, high rates of referrals, or once again, like you were saying, disruptive behaviors, and then helping them facilitate those conversations so that they can then have that capacity to do it themselves as well and keep those practices going. Because a lot of it's about sustainability and schools being able to kind of take that and continue to do that work.
The last thing that I would add is part of the reason for the aggressive timeline is to be able to work with schools sooner than what we have in years past. So making this policy 3 months earlier than what it has been gives time for school teams to start to prepare, talk to staff, and it's not this rush when they come back in August of here are all the changes, kind of take this on. Also with all of these other things going on, we want to be very strategic about the way it's rolled out, and so that we know there are a lot of different competing elements at times for school-based staff, and we want to be as focused and strategic as possible in getting this information to them.
I just had one more question. In the grid, I think there's some behaviors where it's clear it's not entirely, the student shouldn't be held entirely accountable. I use the example of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs in elementary schools. And it's very difficult for an elementary school student to access drugs or alcohol unless it's in the household. So I was wondering, when there's an adult involved in that behavior, how do we address the interventions then versus when it's just a student kind of alone?
That's a great question that I think we'd all have to kind of talk through. Every behavior incident that a school deals with is sort of a symptom of quite often deeper challenges. And I think you've kind of hit a really unique situation where I've got an elementary student clearly with exposure to drugs and alcohol outside of the school. The school team would do everything they could to support that student and to connect with that family, to work together and partner with them, which in the case you've described, would also include having a conversation with the family about the environment in which we're raising the child.
And when we go through the investigation, that would help also make sure that consequences are not at the forefront. I guess I want to put that on the table too, because you talk about it in tandem with the grid. We train our school teams to make sure that they're taking those things into consideration.
I was just going to say also, with in a situation like that, you know, when you're doing an investigation, it might be that you're having outside resources becoming available, like if you need to make mandated reporting, things like that. So I think it's all, you know, our staff, and especially our student services staff, are really well trained in knowing when there's unsafe situations for students, especially in younger ages, that they would be able to get those supports in place.
Thank you. Okay, Kate, then Mary, and Gloria, then did you want it too?
No, I don't.
Okay, Kate, then Mary.
All right, thanks, guys.
PJ.
I mean, I'll be brief because I know we've got more time. I wanted to just add a couple of my personal takeaways, I guess, from some of the time we spent listening to schools. I found it really rich to just talk and hear from folks that were in schools every day. There's maybe two things just to add to your list that I thought were themes, and you know, you guys can weigh in if you would like. One was the role of family in some of our more successful practices with schools and family relationships with teachers, with staff, proactive family relationships that were supportive of academics and kind of all of the good stuff before the bad stuff. So that was one, and it has a question on the back of it. The second theme that I really heard was around, in particular in elementary school, and Sarah, maybe I heard this most strongly from you, is the kind of everything goes back to academics. And that successful systems that are supporting positive behavior are enabling our staff to bring conversations back to academics and supporting learning. So those two themes for me were really quite strong around what works and what is working. So the question maybe on the back of that, and you guys know that I care a lot more about what this implementation doc is going to look like than the grid, and I'm anxious to see it. So, and I'll have thoughts on it once we see it, but that's all good. I'm sure you're working hard on it. What, if anything, can we do in addition to what we've already talked about, et cetera, to support those two things? So family relationships and kind of the system that brings you back to academics. And I know those are big questions, but I wanted to raise them with everybody because for me, they were the two most important takeaways, I guess.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. We've been thinking about it together.
Speak closer to the thing.
Yeah. Sorry, not used to speaking into a mic. Got it. Thank you.
Just lets people see you on TV, that's all.
So exciting.
Just sorry, I didn't mean to stress you out there.
I wrote it down so I can get back to it. One of the document, I think when we present it in draft form, is going to lead with beliefs. And so we also know that in shaping human behavior and developing community, when we lead with beliefs, we have a fighting chance of making some progress and change. And so I feel like you're putting families at the center as partners with us. And when we put academics as the heart of what we do, that we're saying that in our belief statements, and then that gives shape every time we have a behavior interaction or every time a referral is made or a support call is made, that we are reminding one another this is centered around moving academics forward, and we're not alone in this. We're going to connect with families to partner with us because they hold that same belief for their child. So I really believe that in the policy or the behavior education plan that goes out, we've got to see those two themes loud and clear in our belief statement, and then give some practical application in the implementation guide for what that looks like for families. Are my initial things.
No, go for it.
Yeah.
I think in addition to that, when we have the piece about, best practices and implementing what that looks like, and establishing systems, that's going to be that really important piece of really supporting our school staff in being having a more comfort level, right? When we talked with a lot of staff, I'm thinking about Black Hawk in particular, there's a teacher who's like, her comfort level with contacting families was not there. And how are we going to be working to support our staff on that? And I think in tandem with what Sarah was saying about having those core beliefs and reminding each other and supporting each other in that, and not having it be about shame, like why can't you do this or why do you not feel comfortable, but how are we working together? And I think that it's really going to be important to have those professional developments and supporting that, so then we have a system in place so that if someone isn't feeling comfortable, like there's still these like catches to make sure it is still happening, and how are they able to get that support that they need to be coached up and be able to do that.
I love what both of you guys just said. I'm a little uncomfortable with how this kind of presentation looks because it looks like the grid.
Yeah.
And for me, that's not what we did, and it's not what we like should and want to be putting our time and energy into changing for the future. There's no perfect answer in the grid. Like there's just not. And so I'm hopeful that the next iteration will have that document to kind of hold and show that it
does, and it will. I think
different.
You'll be pleased.
So. And if, as you guys are working through that, if there are other resource requests that can support some of what you just spoke to, I personally would love to see them. And I pushed on the alternatives one as well. I think we're going to need a budget request around alternative in for next year, and that it's a part of this work. So I appreciate the internal difficulties of working on multiple timelines, but
thanks.
Thank you guys. This was, I mean, I know it was fast and we're on time delivering something, so it was very good.
Yeah, and also my thanks for all the work and the good thinking that has gone into this. I agree with everything that's said, the values, the supports for our staff. I just don't see it here. I think this is a lot of, here we can do these policies and we do professional development around it, whatever. I don't think our staff feel that that's the solution. Yes, we need to update our policies and we have to do it. We can't wait till a month before school ends and then expect that somehow it gets implemented. We have to get this done. We have to get it done in February. We got to give that time to do it. But we have students, we have way more students with way higher needs than we've ever had. And I don't think we have the staff to be able to handle the high level of needs. And I do not believe the solution is, over the long term, just having more SEAs so that we have one-on-one support. So when a kid is, I want to get at the root. I want to help that student and those families who are dealing with this to get better, to be able to, in essence, learn. But there's so many things. There's a lot, I think, that goes into it, whether it is working with families, whether it is getting better mental health supports. What we know is most families really do not have the capabilities of being able to make the appointments at Journey, get across town, then follow up with the visits, and all of this sort of stuff that is involved. So I know the answers are not clear. It's not like we can put the mental health supports in all of our schools, in all 50 schools, all at once. But I think we have to recognize what we will need and how quickly can we do it and what can we do in the meantime. I would like to see, because I want to be able to visit a school, and when they tell me, like every other school I visit, about the issues that they are having with students with intensive needs and the disruptions, that we are doing something. And that's what I don't see it here. I don't think adding 4 schools is going to, it'll help those 4 schools. I don't think that the one social worker, yeah, it's a good concept, but it's not going to help most of the schools. I don't think they're going to say, well, that's great, that'll do it. I don't think the $200,000 in training of our staff, I don't think they believe that their lack of training is what's going to do it. And I think I keep going back over and over again. I keep it right in a special place in my email so that I can go back to this survey of, we got 1,618 responses from staff on the BEP. And by far and away, when asked what they want to see, it is right there at the mental health supports and additional supports for high needs students. So that's what I want to see. And I think our staff, and whether it's Kate, you had mentioned with regards to those additional supports, but I really think, to me, this is a we should be making a multi-million-dollar investment in the behavioral issues. It gets at the learning of our students, and it gets at our staff and their mental and physical well-being. I think it gets to even turnover of our staff, and I think it's just going to take a lot more.
I'll try taking that. I think we've recognized that we've not been able to provide like detailed answers around how quickly can we build capacity in all seats and alternatives, et cetera. And it's just simply because it's not the work of our department. Going back to last spring with the work that Ricardo did and the work that Paris is now doing around the Office of Youth Reengagement and taking very intentional steps to build that out, and the update he shared just a couple weeks ago, his timeline is unfolding kind of day by day as he learns to understand what's possible, what can he support schools in doing, what can he work with community resources to do. And it would be for him to then sort of answer, what does that budget look like, what might that timeline look like? And I think our committee next Monday will have a really rich conversation with Paris to talk about youth engagement, with Armando, who leads our mental health team, working with Armando, learning that we're limited by practitioners. Some of the decision between could we expand by 2 schools or 4 schools, it took us quite a while to find a practitioner to fill one of the spots this fall. And so I think beyond resources in our district, there are limitations to some of what we may be able to do. If you add up what our committee is asking for, you add the total over time for ERS, you're at around $1.8 million. And then adding in what Paris would ask for with youth reengagement, we're getting up into the millions of dollars, which gets back to my kind of earlier comment around it's a little bit in special ed, it's a little bit in youth reengagement, it's a little bit in mental health, it's a little bit in training for staff, which not necessarily just training because our staff don't know how to do something. That's also time in August for a school response team to sit and spend 8 hours putting together a simple flow chart to hand teachers so that we're collectively communicating more in a better way. So
I appreciate that, and I'm yes, and I agree. But if I think as board president, I am looking for a plan that brings it all together. That's not our job.
Yeah.
I'd like to see something that, and it's probably not your job, but someone here, Jen's job, is to bring it together and to say, because I believe if everyone's thinking by department, we are not going to have an effective way to make sure that in all 50 of our schools, that our staff feel supported, our families feel like there's resources, and we have a game plan. Mm-hmm. I want to know. I want to know if I know any school and any principal, any staff person asks, what are we doing? What support are we getting? Will we be getting next year? And how does that look? I want to be able to answer them. So that's what I'm saying. Jen, this is all great work. I'd like to see how we are going to address the mental health supports and additional supports for high needs students in 2019-20. And if we can't get it done in 1 year, I'd like to see from multiple years, where do we get to where we believe we have to get to be supporting our students, including alternative programs. And not necessarily, I don't know what we're talking about, the youth re-engagement, but we have other alternative programs that we don't talk about too much. And that's where we're talking about the students who they're in our schools now. We're not re-engaging them. We need to engage them. And I think if students are not learning in an environment in which they're thriving, we should be open to alternative environments in which they can get the supports that they need.
Mary and I have talked about this. I've talked with the team about this. I hear you, Mary, completely. And I think the scope of the behavior committee had to be very narrow. But we as a district team, as the senior team, are responsible for bringing you a set of proposals that are here, but not only here, that flow into the next budget proposal that will help to address the concerns that you and our staff and others have.
And I want to hear,
no
obviously,
doubt.
I'm speaking for myself, but I don't think
No, Mary, I mean, we had almost precisely this conversation in our last ad hoc, like almost precisely.
Okay, that's
like
exactly.
word for word. So
and we have
we're all
to
on
work
the same page.
Cross-departmentally, we hear you. We got it.
Yeah, it's agreed. Basically the same.
We all agree. We'll get there.
Okay, yeah. So I think we've got an understanding there all across the board. And so, DJ, go ahead.
Yeah. First, thank you for the work, and there's a lot of good things here, and I think that there's none of the things that anyone wouldn't want to do, but there's also issues about what we can do. And, you know, Mary said that it might take millions of dollars, and one of the things is that we're already spending millions of dollars. And so one of the pieces is that I really hope to, either through this or the ERS process, to come out with ideas for using those millions of dollars differently, particularly how we staff around PBIS, deans, coaches, BEAs, and things like that, and we don't have that. And I understand that you know, that was or was not in the scope of your committee, I'm not quite sure, but here we are in January and we don't have that, which means we won't have it next year. That we won't have a new way to staff and things there. And I believe we need expanded staffing in a variety of places. I'm not quite sure where they are. I want to say that I think loud and clear has come not only from Mary tonight, but from the board in the past, is that the time has come to expand the behavioral health in schools as fast as possible. And I understand the capacity issues with our partners, capacity issues with practitioners. But that's, I mean, I think that you know, that the last 2 or 3 times that's been discussed by the board, that's been the message, is that we've piloted, we've done good things, we understand how to do this system, we see some good results, it's time. And that's probably, and if we can do it via reallocations, that'll be swell. If not, we have to bite the bullet and do it through new allocations. Speaking of reallocations, when I see the expanding training in universal practices, and you have to deal with different budgets from professional learning and behavioral health and all these different budgets, but number one is the time people spend on professional learning is limited, and if we can take the doubt, you know, and I think that as Sarah has noted, that, you know, that the behavioral, the social emotional, and the academic are linked, so let's pull it from academic professional learning and reallocate from there. Because again, I think we have to reflect our priorities here. I've got a lot of notes here about very specific things in the grid things. I don't think that's for tonight. I do want to hit a couple kind of big themes around things. Number one is, as I was going through the grid and looking at stuff really closely, one of the things that occurred to me, and having gone back and forth with the data and looked at individual student data, is I think we need some more specificity around progressivity. And what I mean is that there are places where we've seen students get something at level 2 a dozen, 2 dozen times, And I think that someplace we have to have either some guidance or some absolute rules to say that, you know, this behavior, the third time it goes to level 3. And that kind of and that kind of thing. And I don't know which behaviors those are, but that's a big theme that I would really appreciate you looking at and thinking at, to say which behaviors that would be, what would the rules be, is this a rule or is it guidance? But I think that, you know, listening to people, that there's just this frustration that it keeps, clearly keeping it at level 2 isn't helping the student, it's not helping and it's not helping the climate. So, you know, let's figure out when to move it on. That's one big theme. Second big theme is that bullying. When we hear from families and we hear from students, the informal sense of the word bullying is used often. Our bullying policy is very, very much, it's like a Title IX policy. It doesn't, and, you know, and I think that integrating this notion of bullying, making this, you know, and I think one of the things with the bullying is that it has to requires either a perceived or real imbalance of power. And, you know, when I was a kid, I was made fun of for having freckles. Right? Is this an imbalance of power? No. It hurt just the same. And it disrupted my learning just the same. So I think that we need to look at that language, but I also think that we need to the whole report, and I think we also need to, one of the things is there's improved data collection and things like that, is that I've never seen any data on bullying reports in our district. I mean, I've just never, I mean, I know I've seen once. Once we've seen, once, like a couple years ago, we saw something, but it wasn't very complete. And so I think that integrating the concept of bullying, whether it's the formal sense, and you know, I know legally we have to have a bullying policy that covers certain things, but I think this larger issue of bullying and harassment for students and staff is really important, and I think it's a huge part of what of the climate of our schools. And a little of this gets into the taunting and encouraging stuff, that stuff on page 10 or 12 of the grid, but there's a bigger piece there. You highlight integrating special education things. Can't wait to see that. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But I think that's really important, is how special education is integrated into, especially in the responses part of the BEP. On the dress code, I'm really glad to see the changes. I'd ask you to explore looking at more positive languages and also anti-body shaming language from the Evanston policy. Theirs is a little long. It goes on for like 4 pages of these statements. But I think that incorporating some of that in the introduction would be good. And I also have some concerns about students who are transitioning with the language around disguising oneself or difficult to identify. There's one of the things that's banned. And I think that we have to be really careful that students who are transitioning gender identity, that they don't get caught in there, and that this is, oh, you're disguising yourself. It's a violation of.
I think
right?
that's
so
just a mask.
What's that?
Like, that's like actually covering your face.
Is that, but the language is a little
Yeah,
broader than
so
that.
we
So I
could be
think we have to
clear.
be careful with the language around that. And actually, well, there's a friend of my son's who covers their face. And it's part of their process. And so I think you might know who I'm talking about. We'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
What's that? But I really would like that looked at carefully. Let me just see if there's a couple of cell phones. When you talk to people, when you talk to staff, issues with cell phones come up over and over again, and I don't see any recommendations around changes around cell phones. This is especially high school and middle school level. I don't know about the elementary level. No. But that's, what's that?
It's easy to have kids turn them over at the elementary, so it's not as, it's a deal, and it's becoming more of a deal with social media because it's creeping in the same way it's crept into middle and high school, but they still give them over pretty readily.
So I don't know if, you know, if there's any, if the committee can come up with any. I guess that kind of takes the third thing, is that looking at the last thing I think I'm going to come up with is that looking at data, and this is an overall thing, if you look at certain behaviors, whether it's swearing or disrupting or leaving class, what you have is the 3 grades in middle school have like 2,000 incidents. And the 4 grades in high school have like 600. And so, if you go to our high schools, you will certainly hear as much swearing as you will in middle schools. But there's something that goes on with, don't sweat the small stuff. And this stuff isn't getting reported, and I'm not complaining about it's not getting reported, but I think we have to ask is that if the practice is to not report it, and the practice is to not sweat the small stuff, why do we have the rule if we're not enforcing it? And I think that I think that the message sent for non-enforcement, and then also the discretion, and we talk about biases and we talk about disparities, the discretion used when it's enforced and when it's not enforced. I mean, don't tell me that there's less than 1,000 incidents of students swearing at teachers in high school, right? So I don't believe that. You don't believe that. I don't think you believe it.
I was going to say, so a lot of what you said, I think, truly speaks to setting up solid systems in our buildings. And I think about as, being a social worker and then also now a dean and a behavior responder, if you don't have solid systems, your data is garbage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. You're waiting until you're really pissed off and then you put something in and maybe they've done it 10 times before and then you finally code it. Right. You aren't consistent with it. And I really, truly believe, and I was saying this today at school, that we do need to get on the small stuff. Because when we get on the small stuff, we set a precedent and we also say that's not tolerated. So then hopefully it doesn't continue and we can also then do the intervention part. And so I think truly what I'm hearing from you is setting up those solid systems is what we need to spend a lot of time on. So when I think about professional development, like Jay said, getting our behavior teams together to have a clear understanding and then working together with staff so that everyone knows what their role is, what's expected of them. Because I think also there is a lot of bias that comes in when you don't have a system in place. And it's hard to even have those conversations about what that looks like if you don't have anywhere to start.
I guess kind of two pieces. One is exactly what you said, and I think that if we're going to have policies, we need to have a system, we need to have consistency, we need to have it, and we need to have it easy for everyone and well understood. One of the things that comes out of the climate surveys is that nobody thinks this stuff is done fairly, or or is this consistent? Is the numbers are low for students, staff, and parents. But the other piece is, are there things here that are in the BEP that are behavioral violations that we don't want there? That if we're never going to enforce them, or if we're going to enforce them so rarely, and I don't know what they might be. I think, some of this, maybe some of the language around cell phones, maybe some of the, because if we're not going to enforce them, then we're not going to enforce them. And so I think that that's something that maybe we should be thinking about. If we're gonna have them there, then exactly what you say, Patrice. So kind of both.
Yep.
And I think that's about it for now. Yeah, that's it.
Can I just speak to one piece, though, too, that I just wanted to bring up, too? I think that we also have to keep in mind the proactive systems, I think, as well, because as much as we do focus on some of those students who have those intense mental health needs, they also are still accessing our universal systems. So we have to make sure we have put the systems in place to support those systems, because we can have students accessing those mental health supports, but if they go back to the classroom and then they're re-triggered, then we're just in this vicious cycle. So I think we also have to make sure that we are really focusing on how are we building systems for belonging, and so that our students feel safe and the structures and the routines and the expectations are clear.
I think that the question is often asked, how do we know PBIS is working?
Right.
And one of the things is that that's the kind of universal thing where there's no or some of the restorative practices, that these are things where they're not responses, they are building the community, building the expectations, building the standards, and we don't know. I mean, and measuring that is really difficult.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and it's there. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we landed, I feel like the last ad hoc meeting that we had, we landed at exactly this place, that we need to invest in our systems, because if you can put a mental health practitioner in every building and it could fall flat on its face if it's not embedded in a community that knows how to even identify and support those students. And we do have measures to look at proactive. Some of the PBIS metrics show us kind of what's going on the proactive side. And another like core philosophy is what you turn your attention to and what you pay attention to is what the school ends up focusing on. And so when we turn our attention to learning and student success, and they're supported to be successful, but it's not the centerpiece of their education, it's amazing to see what happens and to watch student thrives when they have. And we're a school that's had the luxury of having BHS for, this is our 4th year. So, I mean, it's fun to see how that has given life, and that we can build systems that change entire buildings around.
And just what I add is that one of the calls here is for revising goals and metrics. And what we found out here is that the goals and metrics can drive the behavior and drive the staff behavior, drive the focus, drive the reporting. All that can be, and so I think we got to be extra careful this time on that.
About what those are.
What those are. What those are. And, you know, I've said over and over again is that I think the goal and metric shouldn't be the number of incidents, but the number of incidents that led to a successful intervention. The number of successful interventions. Or the number, percentage of successful interventions. I don't really, you know, I mean, that's what we, and tell principals, we don't care if you have 50,000 incidents. If you have 49,000 successful interventions,
I mean,
you're good.
I think the maybe going back to your beliefs piece, like if what we believe and we know to be true is it's possible to set up successful systems that lead to positive climate and academics, right? So if those beliefs can be linked to our metrics, we're not measuring the grid. Like, the grid's easy.
It
and
is the
it's
easiest
not
part of the work, actually.
the right thing for us to be focused on.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're looking forward to getting lots of good stuff from you guys.
Yeah, we're certainly not done. And thank you for taking it this far. This is a discussion that is never going to end as long as the school district goes on, because these problems will never go away. Our response has to get better. So let me summarize again. What we're going to be asked to vote on is the continuation, more or less the acceptance of the plan and the continuation of the work to address the differentiation, the rewriting of the beginnings, those types of things. And then probably in June, when we wrote on the budget, that's when money will be decided where it goes into what intervention practices we're going to enhance.
Yeah, but we need much earlier visibility into the money stuff.
Well, this is the second part of what I was going to say. The communication errors that happened at Memorial, as an example, cannot happen going forward. We've already hearing from people running for boards very simplistic and reactionary statements about how behavior plan can be synthesized down to 7 pages or something like that. So that type of thinking is so out in left field that it should be dismissed immediately. And in order for us to do that, we have to be more transparent about what we're doing so people can understand how complicated and complex this is, and how almost it should be our #1 priority going forward. So when there's transparency issues, the solution to that is more transparency. So let's remember that, and going forward be very clear about what we're asking for. And also it's time for us to dismiss people making really off-the-wall comments that aren't helpful at all and designed for some other type of purpose. So when people make simplistic, reactionary statements, you can use that as a quote. They don't know what they're talking about and shouldn't be anywhere near having anything to do with our schools. So let's kind of keep that in our mind going forward. And this was a good discussion, and I think you heard from us what the understanding of the complexity of what you're trying to do, but also the support for hearing more about what you really need to accomplish this. I was at the meeting that the Black Hawk staff was here and heard that teacher plead with us to say, I don't know what to do. They don't trust me. I don't know how to engage with them, and so I don't. So she was a good staffer. She's an experienced staffer. She's a good person. And that was the finger on the exact issue. We've got to resolve that in ways in that maybe that collaboration among county and other support systems has to be there so that barrier can be removed, so that staff can feel like she's making a difference here, because that was the essence of it. She didn't feel like she could do anything to make a difference in a situation like that. So and she was doing everything that we had for her to give. So then that means we need more of other community partners and other ways to help our staff do that. And she's probably not alone in feeling that kind of helplessness. So we can't allow that to continue. It's not her fault. It's not that family's fault. It's not that student's fault either. We've got to build a system that collaborates with everyone out there so we can get at this stuff. So anyone else want to make any more statements like I just did? All right, are we done? Thank you guys again. This is
Thank you
good
too.
work. And your next meeting is next Monday prior to the operation, so that's you might see more of us there. Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Ahmad?
Aye.
All else in
I just say the
favor?
same thing over and over again.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
I just say the same thing.